At the height of the swinging 60s, a band of Australian thieves known as the Kangaroo Gang took London by stealth. They stole millions of pounds in diamonds and luxury goods from exclusive jewellers and department stores. The plunder went on for more than a decade, but they never resorted to violence.
They came with a kind of flying panache. You know, they were the light horsemen of thieves.
Well, they were the best. They proved themselves to be the best shoplifters in the world.
These blokes weren't just shoplifters. This was Ocean's 11 stuff.
You know, not just take one item, maybe just 10 in one heap. How they used to do it, I don't know.
They would take anything that wasn't nailed down. They'd go to stores and take everything in the store.
They were thieves, they dealt in diamonds, they dealt in money, and they dealt in guile and trickery.
Welcome to Asprey, gentlemen. How may we help you today? We're just browsing, thank you. We can help ourselves. Very good, sir.
From 1788, Britain had sent its best thieves across the world to Australia. In the 1960s, some made it home. There were 5 master thieves: the King, the Fibber, the General, Wee Jimmy, and the dashing Georgie Gardner. Together with their mob, they tore up London in broad daylight and became known as the Kangaroo Gang. Thieves by appointment. By 1968, the Kangaroo Gang were on a golden run. Their leader, King Arthur Delaney, had brought a new technique to England. His distraction methods had been so successful that no high-class retailer was safe. Every day, more than 100 Australian thieves were operating across London. With police powerless to stop them, their confidence was sky high.
There was nothing that they couldn't do, nothing that they couldn't take, nowhere they couldn't enter.
The great winning aspect for these Australian shoplifters in England was that the stores were so open, they had so little security protection. They couldn't believe their luck.
In they'd go, can we see this diamond ring? Yes. Either it would be switched or one of the girls who would be with them would faint and say, I'm having a baby and he's the one who's the father. And in those days that would cause a great old stir, by which time her colleagues would remove the remainder of the diamonds.
Shoplifters taught me many things. They taught me that if ever you're going to tell a lie, you look someone right in the eye and tell it. You don't look away. They'd learnt the body language and the science of stealing, and they taught it to the English.
The gang would spend their loot just as quickly as they stole it. Arthur Delaney's share would find its way into the coffers of gambling houses and fashionable clubs.
Oh, he'd carry a wad of money if that's what he had, and he probably wouldn't go home till it was all gone. Whatever was left, he'd go to the baccarat.
Arthur was a great celebration man. In fact, they all were. They would steal all day, drink and gamble and womanise all night. So they would be in there and Arthur would be playing baccarat, losing all his money and you know, shouting the bar, drinks and all this sort of stuff and big noting himself.
Each of the shoplifters had a style of their own. They worked together out of necessity. They identified targets and they performed their tasks of distracting the staff, taking the goods and selling them at half price. But then they would spend it and often spend it together. One of their favourite things to do was to get a flash car, a Bentley or a big Mercedes and drive down to Monte Carlo and lose the lot.
Tales of their exploits were now spreading across London's underworld. Gorgeous Georgie Gardner had raised the stakes in a bold series of raids on banks. He targeted the foreign exchange counters, where security was non-existent.
And the banks had just a desk. They never had all this built up front and this and that. And there wasn't a camera anywhere. There wasn't nothing, you know. I mean, they had virtually an open go. They could do what they liked.
It was one thing working in small jewellers on Bond Street and so forth, to then moving to big banking chambers, which were full of people and lots of angles. They had to create much higher level distractions to pull their jobs off.
The Kangaroo Gang employed the fundamental principle of all magicians. To conceal the smaller move, there must first be a bigger move. But Georgie Gardner and his team turned it into a Royal Command performance.
Next, please.
G'day, mate. How are you?
Fine, thank you. And you?
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking. Just in from Australia. Look, I need a little help with exchange rates, and you look like an expert.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, great. Well, we're going across to the continent from here, and I need to know what currencies are going to work best for me.
Well, there are some restrictions on what you can take in and out of England. Whereabouts are you going?
Oh, well, everywhere I can. Hey, here, let's take a look at this map. So, first we're going across to Rome. Now, they've got the drachma there, haven't they?
No, Italy is the lira. The drachma is Greece.
Oh. Oh, so they have, yeah, right. So I'm going to need a few of them. How many of those do you reckon I'm going to need?
Security! Quick, security! Oh, hurry, man, this fellow's having an epileptic fit!
George Gardner should be remembered as one of England's most successful bank robbers. He was never caught, and he never carried a firearm. Distraction was his weapon of choice. For that, he relied on his longtime partner, Normie Seddon, and a cast of supporting players.
And Georgie Gardner, his right-hand man was Norm, that's for sure. They were always together, they went together, they worked together. I don't think they slept together, but they were very, very close.
So they needed to position the teller in a certain way at the front of the in the teller's booth, push them to one side away from their cash drawer, which a guy like Normie Seddon was very good at. He would come up with some inquiry and draw them to the side with a foreign exchange chart or some other thing, detailed information.
Here, let's take a look at this map.
And this is the way they played it. And sometimes they used 6 people as diversionary tactics.
All the head pullers had to be in the right place and everyone had to do their work. But taking TCs was a little bit different than taking something at the main cashier's till. The TCs were always at the back or at the side. And those days, they did not have big grills going up in the wall.
When George was confident that everyone's heads were pulled, he'd pull out his extendable car aerial with a hook on the end of it, simply reach over, grab the rubber bands around the traveller's checks or the foreign exchange, and ping them back. And he would clean out the whole drawer while this was going. He had expert timing, was incredibly quick.
George Gardner's head pullers were the best in the business. They could adapt to any circumstance with just the right distraction. There were occasions where a fight might work best for creating the time and space for Gardner to claim his prize.
How many of those do you reckon I'm going to need?
Hey, what the? Get out of my pocket, you bloody thief! I beg your pardon. How dare you accuse me of such a thing? Well, that's my £10 note in your hand, chum. Hand it over. Pick my pocket, will you?
Oi, bring it up, you two.
But he tried to pick my pocket. That is an outrageous assertion. I'll give you an outrageous assertion. Oh, will you? I could just indeed. Oh.
But for the biggest occasions, Gardner would call for a lady known as Ma Barker.
So I'm going to need a few of them. How many of those do you reckon I'm going to need?
Whew. Oh, it's so hot in here.
I hadn't noticed.
Oh, no, love, it's a bloody scorcher. I'm just burning up.
It's not that hot.
Oh, these bloody clothes.
What do you think you're doing?
Get your hands off me, you dirty codger. Oh, that's better. Oh, now I just feel like dancing. Woo!
It was a bank on the corner of Knightsbridge. Right there, right in the middle of everything, you know what I mean? Well, she just stripped off, so they're all gazing. And then he slipped behind the counter and, you know, nicked a couple of trays of cashier's money while they're watching this. They're doing a gypsy dance.
Georgie Gardner's bank jobs were rip-roaring successes and the cash came flooding in.
And this was so successful. It was incredible. I mean, there was one time when they did it, there was actually a policeman in the queue waiting to cash his wages, and he didn't see it either.
Criminal intelligence suggests that there was well in excess of £1 million, probably a couple of £1 million that had been taken in this way. So it was becoming very apparent that they were taking more out of the system than our armed robbers.
Now the police were really interested in the Aussies. Robbing banks set off alarm bells at the highest levels of English society.
They weren't taking on banks in the sense of going over the counter and shooting up the ceiling. What they were doing was stealing travellers' cheques, forging them and robbing banks that way. and that was regarded as just not on.
Once you take out Lloyd's Bank or Barclays, or you're starting to get into the real English ruling class who have connections in the Parliament, who have connections at the highest level in the force. And this started to filter down through Force Command that it's time to put these cheeky Aussies out of business because they're beginning to hurt us.
As outrage spread over the colonial crime wave, Scotland Yard swung into action. A small, under-resourced criminal intelligence squad, C11, began to compile a special dossier known as the Australian Index. The lads weren't hard to find, as they congregated in pubs almost every day.
Hello, and who might you be? Jim, want to come and take a look and see if you can identify this new fella talking to Jimmy Lloyd? Come take a look. Which one's Lloyd again? Slightly balding. He's standing at the front talking to the bald guy. Right in front of you.
Righto. Seen that face before. There's pictures on the table.
Any luck?
I think it's Jimmy Lloyd's brother, Cecil.
Twins, aren't they?
And the Aussies say here they pose as twins, but they actually aren't.
Well, they look like twins.
No, Cecil's a couple of years younger, but they swap identities to avoid detection. Cripes, they go to some trouble. Jimmy's got a pile of aliases. William Ritchie, Thomas Lee, Peter William Lloyd, James Edward Wilson, Harry Lee, Arthur Jessup, William Edward Lloyd, Peter Lloyd, William Ritchie.
Right.
It also says here the way to tell them apart is that Jimmy's got half his index finger missing on his right hand.
Doesn't seem to hinder him thieving. Take a look at this.
Do you mind? In broad daylight.
Glasses Barry had a pub at Paddington, and that was a place that they all seemed to go and meet and greet, so that we were able to go, sit outside and collect a few photographs. We would then get their Australian record come over with their fingerprints, so that a criminal record office file was opened immediately, and therefore we were using the names that they had in Australia, not the ones they gave us when they were first arrested in London.
But once there was some sort of organisation as to who was doing what where and starting to make an index and a list, then the days of the kangaroos were, if not numbered, it was becoming prudent to leave and find other fields.
In December 1967, the first Australian index was published, and intelligence began to flood in from police across the United Kingdom. Every station, it seemed, had a story of the Aussies' exploits.
I think the first Police Gazette, maybe there was 75 or even more photographs and descriptions of the Australian team. As we knew then, this of course escalated for the simple reason there was numerous phone calls coming back. What about this one? What about that one? You haven't got this one.
After the publication of the Australian Index in the Police Gazette and the follow-up work, life became much more hard for the Aussies. They were suddenly recognised.
Yeah, well, the writing was definitely on the wall, and it was a shock. And the amount of prison that was handed out was also a shock. So a lot of people did scarper. It was only really the masters that stayed and plotted through. So it really weeded out the good from the bad, the boys from the men.
One of the gang members who stayed was George Gardner, whose daring bank-robbing exploits had drawn the attention of DC Mike Pearce. One of the first big names to be caught was the master of distraction, Normie Seddon.
We went to a block of flats, I think it was on the first floor. Some were stationed outside in case he decided to leave via a window. And I and some colleagues went to the front door, and we basically knocked and went through the door quite quickly to be greeted by his girlfriend, who incidentally was arrested as well. But when we searched the place, we found certain items that could connect him to some of the bank stamps that went on the travellers' checks. So in the end, he went straight to a police station where he was interrogated and charged.
Pierce's investigation led to Seddon being convicted and sent to prison for more than 10 offences. However, his partner Gardner fled to the Canary Islands, where he was later captured, but with the aid of the Kangaroo Gang and a handsome bribe, Gardner eventually slipped from Pierce's grasp.
Everybody had to put their hands in their pocket, and that's when I learnt that it was approximately £40,000 that secured their release, which in 1969 was a huge amount.
They were very generous in supporting each other when there was a bit of aggro. You know, when somebody shit the fan on something, somebody's busted and they're not holding, they all had a whip round and made sure that everything was all right.
The Kangaroo Gang had always chipped in to help a mate in need, but Wee Jimmy believed that George Gardner had gone too far this time. His bank robbing was ruining life for the rest of the Heists.
I think he was very, very upset that these people were bringing discredit amongst the organisation and drawing them to attention of police, because they would prefer to get on with their work unmolested as opposed to bringing their activities to attention.
Despite his complaints about Gardner, Wee Jimmy was actually planning his own bank jobs. His technique made allowances for his jockey-like stature.
There was one story where they went into a bank at lunchtime. They were unable to reach the box, so they went and got a milk crate, stood on the milk crate to give them more leverage to lean over so they could take the box with the travellers' checks in.
By the end of 1969, Baby Bruce had graduated from picking pockets in the London Underground to jewel heists on the continent. But one of his best thefts was strictly personal. He stole Arthur's girl.
I was fascinated by Paddy Burridge. You know, she was, in fact, quite an attractive lady, and she was connected with the king, and that gave me a little bit of inspiration to... it gave me two inspirations. One, that she was attractive, one, that she was associated with the king, so it was my name to nick something off him for a change. And I don't think that went down well over the years either. Perhaps he always had a little bit of a grudge for that. But then again, Paddy left me and broke my heart and ran off with another fella, so there you are.
Broken-hearted Bruce then left London for Amsterdam to take on the biggest jewel caper of his life.
Well, it was estimated that it was $500,000 worth of diamonds that were removed. The snow came down, and unfortunately, the first time in history, Amsterdam was frozen with 2 meters of snow and nobody could move. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, of course, the alarm went off and they circulated around that there were foreigners in the shop that day, and the three of us were nicked and charged.
The party ended abruptly for Baby Bruce and his two accomplices inside a grim police station in Amsterdam's red light district.
It was an interrogation police station. So the two gentlemen came in, dressed up as Gestapos with their leather coats on, and in the middle of winter, as they would, and their caps and everything. One of them spoke to me and asked me where the diamonds were. We would like to know, where are the jewelry? And I said, I don't know, where are the jewelry? That was it. So it was easy, you know, we were going to piss out of this. So that's how you just get rid of them, just tell them nothing. Then he walked along to Liz, and he asked her the same question. Where is the jewelry? But before Liz could answer, he grabbed her violently by the hair, pulled her up off the seat that we were sitting on, and with his right fist, he hit her so hard, he smashed her nose there, brought her into his knee, put her teeth up through her gum hair. She fell on the floor unconscious, and then he kicked the shit out of her underneath the bench. We had a horrible experience, which turned me off the jewel theft for life.
By the early 70s, it was getting tough for the Aussies. George Gardner had been chased back to Australia, leaving only 4 master takers still working in London.
The Australian voice in the early 70s was persona non grata. If you open your mouth in any way to be an Australian, they press the button straight away. I mean, they were causing damage here, big-time damage. Not just a couple of diamonds out, they were ripping the place to pieces.
The coppers were hearing about this, that, and everything else, people getting plenty and plenty and plenty, and they thought they wasn't getting enough. So they started to put their foot down a bit and sent one or two of them away.
And the attitude was, when the shit hits the fan, we'll leave. And that was the status of the day. It didn't make that much difference. And some people, like the King, he wanted to be front page in the Police Gazette. He's hit the front page.
That may have been part of his downfall, because the best thief, the best con man, the best villain is the one you've never heard of.
The police were putting the pressure on the gang from many angles. English associates like Dave Barry came in for special attention. Police used the Gazette to call his loyalty into question.
Well, the bastards, they started giving me a bad name. I was having murders with people. Well, they said I was an informant, the bastards. Which is, you couldn't give a man a bigger insult. But I've never pleaded guilty in my life any time at all, and I've been charged with murder twice, so they can't say a lot about that, can they?
If you arrest somebody, he winds you up, you can put little bits in there that can cause damage for the future. It's just a little question of one for me.
And this would spread like wildfire, and it was very hard to accept. You know, were you a grouse or were you not a grouse? And at a level like where Davey Barry was, it's impossible to say whether he was or he wasn't, but in my opinion, I would say definitely not.
The police tactics of divide and rule began to weaken the bonds of loyalty between the remaining gang members.
The Australians were regarded as solid, but if you speak to one or two policemen of the era, they will say that they could be fairly nasty, and it's thought that if, or they thought, that if one of the men was going bent on them, he would just disappear, not necessarily on a flight home, but just disappear full stop.
I do know two people that died mysteriously. One that I'd been with the evening, he committed suicide. The following day he was in the mortuary having taken an overdose of drugs. And I do know another one that died mysteriously with his head in a gas oven.
That was an accident because he got 9 months and his girlfriend finished up with his guy who was supposed to be his brother. So he was in the Glasshouse pub in Bayswater, and he said to me, he said, I feel like committing suicide. So for a joke, I went next door and got a £5 bag of shillings. I said, here, Jerry, help yourself. Well, he did. Knocked himself off. You had to put shillings in the gas meter in the place he was living.
The sweet spot in time for the Kangaroo Gang had ended. With England now too hot, the fibber took his bag of tricks to South Africa in search of diamonds. However, this venture ended in a Johannesburg jail.
He convinced the inmates that he was Lionel Rose's boxing trainer. Lionel Rose is a world champion Australian fighter. And so he had the whole jail in training to be contenders for a world title. You could be a champion, which meant he then got a very good sell. He had manservants waiting on him hand and foot, and then ultimately finished up being in charge of the prison radio.
At the same time, Wee Jimmy Lloyd had also been captured in Switzerland during a jewel heist. To Wee Jimmy, time in jail was an occupational hazard.
His philosophy was that as soon as he was arrested, he considered that he was serving time, and he would do it in solitary confinement, basically because he didn't want to speak to the other idiots.
While Wee Jimmy languished in a Swiss jail, Arthur was back in Sydney, where he met the true love of his life, Alexis, a gorgeous blonde with her own history, including a jealous ex-boyfriend.
Skinny Fred will rue the day he threatened Arthur the King, Delaney.
That wasn't a threat. Can't you let it go?
I can't stand the way he leers at you.
He's not even a memory anymore.
He seems to think he still owns you.
Christ, love, you really want to get into a fight? Look at you. You couldn't knock a pea off a chop.
Well, neither could he.
Then what's the point?
My dear, it's called honour. I shall return anon, victorious.
Yeah, just make sure you return.
You can watch me at the window if you like.
Men. Speaking of idiots. Arthur! The back seat! Arthur!
Hey, darling. Up in a minute.
Oh, the gun! Arthur!
He was very lucky he wasn't killed outright. Struck him in the back, down on his spine, instantly paralysing him from the waist down. He thought it was all over.
You fucking gutless.
Arthur, you all right?
I told you I was too scared to fight the king. Oh, Jesus.
It was suspected that Alexis' ex-boyfriend, Skinny Fred McKinnon, had brought a well-known assassin with him that night to kill Arthur. But for once, his aim was off. Only one bullet found its mark.
And the bullet remained in his back for the rest of his life. It was pressing on a nerve. Doctors believed that he would get some use of his legs back, but it was far from certain. So this was a substantial obstacle for a travelling crook, as you can imagine. But he determined that he was going to walk again.
And he did, defying the odds one more time. In 1971, Bruce returned to London from his jail stint in Amsterdam. With jewel theft off his agenda, he was back to picking pockets on the underground. But by now, corrupt senior police controlled and organised the plunder of King Solomon's mines.
He quickly worked out that he needed to get with the strength, because what he discovered was that nobody in London worked the underground without the licence of the police.
Because there was 5 teams, not everybody was allowed to be downstairs at the same time. With us, we had pretty much the best of the lines, which would be the Piccadilly line, Knightsbridge, South Ken. That was our area.
What the pickpockets could take was strictly controlled by their police minders.
The money would go, or the credit cards would go. The rest of the wallet, the rest of the dummy would be put immediately into a post office box out the front. So the post office box, when they cleaned it out, they would find it. The man had reported it at the police station, and 9 times out of 10, they'd have it back within 24 hours. That was one of the rules that came down from upstairs.
In early 1972, with short jail stints behind them, some of the Australians were back in London. But word soon reached the Criminal Intelligence Branch C11 squad that the Aussies were back in business.
I had a phone call one day from Len Mountford, who was the Chief Security Officer of American Express. Len wanted to know why nothing was being done by the Yard in particular about the Aussies who were running rampant throughout London.
Wee Jimmy and his gang were back in business in a big way. David Woodland began investigating the Lloyds' activities. They were prime suspects in a series of bank thefts.
American Express alone had been hit for well over £150,000, which in those days was quite a bit of money, but they'd also hit the other credit card companies, and it was coming close to $500,000 or even more.
And it wasn't just banks that Wee Jimmy was after. He knew this second coming of the Kangaroo Gang would not last long. It was time to go, flat out.
I was speaking to one guy, and he said he'd been driving past Harrods, and he looked in the window, and there's the 2 Lloyds. Brown coats on, Harrods badges, taking minks off the models in the window, over their arms, and away and chased down the road by this cop. Yeah, I mean, they were so blatant. And it, as people used to say, they're more front than Brighton.
Intelligence indicated that Wee Jimmy had once again joined forces with the General Billy Hill. Everything from shirts and sheets to gold and diamonds were being pinched.
Billy Hill was an active member of the group. Hill would go out thieving, and he would work with the Lloyds. They would have jewellery, they would have anything that wasn't nailed down, and they were good at it.
these guys made a point of going to the pubs and places like that where they knew they'd meet CID officers and they'd get friendly with them. I mean, they were very sociable fellas. They were good company. They could tell a good yarn. And they'd get invited to police dues, boxing matches and things like that.
The fact that the Australians had some police on their payroll made Woodland even more determined to bring them to justice. He secretly assigned Jimmy Smith to gather intelligence.
He said, we're going to hit the Aussies like they've never been hit before. He said, but they have got minders. He said, you know that, they're being looked after. He said, they carry money. When they go out doing the business, they'll maybe carry $1,000 in their pocket to pay off police. So Dave Woodland said, look, this has got to be kept strictly here. I'll tell you where it is, what's happening. You try and go out to something else, and if you get the pictures, don't put them in any index. And I was taking them home and keeping them at home so nobody would know what I'm doing. And this went on for over a year.
I put telephone intercepts on two of the leading guys that were the Lloyd brothers, Jimmy and Cecil Lloyd. Well, what we were trying to do is build up a picture of them to get as much background information as we can as to their whereabouts, their contacts, what they were doing.
There was a clique of fairly senior officers who were involved in some forms of corruption. And David Woodland found that he suspected his commander, David Dilley, was actually tipping off Wee Jimmy about the operation they were placing on him.
Yeah, right. David, you won't believe it. Tap on Jimmy Lloyd's phone has been blown.
What?
It's been sold out.
That's impossible. We've kept this completely under wraps.
Take a butcher's hook at this.
Hello?
Cecil, it's Jimmy.
Hello, mate. What's doing?
Well, nothing I'm going to tell you about in the dog and bone.
What's that, Jim?
Gee, do I have to spell it out, you numbskull? We've been tinkered. Oh, Bill, listening to every word.
How do you know?
I just know, all right? I don't want to talk about it. I'll see you tonight at the usual place, all right?
All right, Jimmy. Good as gold. See you at the dentist then.
Jesus, Cecil, you are an imbecile.
Unbelievable. There's a rat in the ranks.
Or crooked telephone operator outside. Either way, taps are coming off from tomorrow. Governor's had enough.
Damn. We're so close.
Shame. Put a lot of work into these two.
Do me a favour, Wolf. Keep the taps going for another fortnight.
Governor
So he doesn't have to know.
It's on your head. If he finds out, you'll catch it.
Leave him to me. You know why they call him the Kipper.
Yeah.
Two-faced, no backbone.
The intelligence from the wiretaps dried up, and Woodland believed that David Dilley, a.k.a. the Kipper, was the reason Wee Jimmy seemed to be one step ahead. But Woodland kept D.C. Smith snapping pictures of the Lloyds and their cronies at one of Dave Barry's pubs.
He'd be in his little Morris Minor in the back of the van there, and he'd shoot them from, maybe 30, 40 metres away.
They used to go there a Sunday morning, round about 11 o'clock, and I'd be parked up from 8:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, got a good position, and sit there. And there was nothing better than a summer's day. And they sat on the windowsill, and then they would pass the beers round, banging away with the Nikon with a 400mm lens. Next one would sit down at the window. It was as if they say, "Here I am, Jim, get some over." I eventually ended up, I think there was something like 120 to 130 Aussies that were in the team at various times.
To follow the Aussies around was a pleasure because they were obviously having a great time. And there's Jimmy, he's seen these guys down the lens. He thought, these fellas aren't too bad, you know. They're having a bloody good. I wouldn't mind being out, you know, apart from the crime, of course. Wouldn't mind their lifestyle, you know.
I'd hate to say lovely guys, but I mean, you would quite easily socialise with them. They were that type of people. They were bad, but they weren't bad. Does that sound wrong to say? I mean, they were thieves. But so was Robin Hood, and people liked him.
Despite the growing brief of evidence, David Woodland was ordered by his boss, Commander David Dilley, to cease operations on Wee Jimmy's gang, including the telephone taps.
There was no information forthcoming from that tap, and pretty soon Woodland's commander comes and says, "Why are you wasting time on the Australians? Get rid of that phone tap, you know, and do as you're told."
That's it. I have to admit defeat on the Lloyd brothers.
You're pulling my leg.
No, why?
You haven't read the transcript from this morning, have you?
No, I just got in.
It's on. This is the big one.
Oh, yeah? Like you said?
Yeah. Remember our uncle in Manchester?
Yeah, sure, Jimmy.
Well, we're all going to go down and see him tomorrow. We're all on the 8:15 a.m. out of Euston, all right?
Right, yeah. I'll see you bright and early.
Euston Station. Try not to sleep in this time, all right?
Gotcha.
Ah, Mr. Lloyd. I think we've got you.
I was fully aware of the fact that Jimmy's surname was Lloyd, so that could be Lloyd's Bank, Manchester. It was worth a punt.
Keeping his commander out of the loop, Woodland assembled a team of over 100 officers to meet the Lloyd's train in Manchester and to track them through the city's banking district. It was a big risk. If things went wrong, his boss, David Dilley, would have his head on a plate.
The whole job just went off so beautifully. The train rolled into Manchester Piccadilly railway station.
I was sitting basically face to face with them. And that was a very strange thing because I had looked at them close up in long lenses. But there they were in real life. And there was the two Lloyds, Wee Jimmy, the other ones, having a laugh. They were going for a day out as far as everybody in the train knew. Some Aussie guys just going out for a laugh.
They went into all the banks. They had travellers' checks off from Barclays Bank. They went to the Automobile Association and they had off blank international driver's licenses.
We were all on a high. There's no two ways about it. I mean, this is a year's work. Keeping it away from people, keeping it away from them, and some very lonely nights and long days. But done it.
5 Australians were arrested in Manchester. The next day, back in London, Woodland's team swooped again, picking up another 6 suspects.
I think about 11 people were arrested altogether with travellers' checks and false passports.
On this critical piece of intuitive police work, one of the biggest busts in the entire Kangaroo Gang history, you know, was made.
Somehow the prize catch, Wee Jimmy, slipped through the net.
Unfortunately, Jimmy, who was quite an elusive character, he didn't come in on that first haul. He got away and he was nicked later in Belgium.
Extradited to London, Wee Jimmy discovered that only D.C. Smith could place him on the train to Manchester. Before the trial, a flying squad officer approached Smith with a bribe, asking him to say he wasn't sure if it was Wee Jimmy or his brother Cecil on the train.
And just all you've got to say, they're identical twins. So he said, "Now, there's a nice drink in it for you." He said, "There's $3,000 been laid aside. Now, we're going back to early 70s. My mortgage was $4,500. $3,000 was a lot of money in MD's books."
Despite the size of the bribe, Jimmy Smith could not be bought and stood firm on the day of the trial.
They are identical. I said, but the man on the train I can positively identify because he had the top of his index finger missing. And stand up. So Wee Jimmy stands up. Hold your hands up. Judge. I see 9.5. Thank you, DC Smith. He wasn't impressed. He got 3 years.
Woodland and Smith brought down the Australians, much to the dismay of corrupt police bosses. So despite their success, both found themselves back in uniform, walking the beat soon after.
So Jim and I, that were sort of instrumental in licking the Australian team, suddenly found ourselves wearing top hats. And it didn't go down too well, to be quite honest with you. You know. So that was that.
Having done all these things and been involved in major crime investigations, and I'm walking around Romford one night with a sergeant who says, look at these cars. They're all parked outside the cinema. They shouldn't be there. A Sunday night, put tickets on them. I didn't. And that was the final crunch. So I put my papers in. And then I went out doing investigation work.
The days of the Kangaroo Gang were numbered. Billy Hill was in one jail after another in the 1970s. He spent 1978 in the notorious Santé prison in Paris. At the same time, the King was languishing in a jail in Madrid. He and Alexis were caught trying to flee the city after a big heist.
Dearest Jean, a few lines to thank you for your letters which we received. It was beautiful of you to think of us. Under the circumstances, we're both in happy spirits and doing it the best way possible. Alexis is in the next door building to me, and I'm allowed 2 visits weekly, Tuesday and Friday. She has a nice suntan, as in where she is, she can sunbake in the nude. Though I can't see her pity.
Dave, well, old son in a spot of bother, Archie and myself. Sent Peter a letter as he contacted you. All our clothes are at the Nord Hotel. Do you know anyone who can collect them and deliver them to the Nick?
There is nothing we're in need of. Only freedom. Oh, it's Alexis's birthday on the 18th of September. It'd be nice if you could send her some flowers through Interflora. I know she'd like that.
Peter has money of mine, and Archie's. Just ring him and see if you can sort it out. Charged with theft, 4 croc bags, 6 watches, and 10 croc belts.
Hope you picked plenty of winners. And once again, thanks for writing. Love and kisses, Alexis and King.
Send me a telegram so I shall know you got the letter. Cheers, Billy.
The letters from jail show how far the Kangaroo Gang had fallen. The master thieves of the 1960s were now spending more time in prison than stealing jewels.
The hoist was over. Everything had caught up. The yard had dismantled the operations as such, and Old Bill were not corrupt anymore. You couldn't do anything, which was a downside of it. Police informers were running all over the place, and it was easy to identify people, so you had to stop.
By the 1980s, the Kangaroo Gang was no more. Only the King remained to attempt the big jobs, still believing he was invincible. Then cancer struck.
So it looks like it's over for the King at this moment. You think, well, he's bedraggled, he's had cancer, he's been shot, he's been in every jail across Europe.
The King wanted to go out with a bang. And what better way than to take on the jeweller appointed to Her Majesty the Queen?
Asprey was founded in 1781, and the name Asprey is synonymous with unique, luxurious product. You come to Asprey to buy something that you can't find anywhere else.
He could have gone after anybody, but he went after the best, most prestigious shop probably in the world.
But this wasn't the 1960s. It was the 1990s. And Asprey had all the latest security, including CCTV.
There is a use to it because, one, it can show a whole lot of things. One, it provides an audit trail if, in fact, you can see the person. 2, it will give a situation of a deterrency to the people because they think my image could be caught on camera. 3, I think, importantly, it can show you how your staff are operating at the time as well. So that can provide real basis for training to your staff to say, look, this theft's occurred, this is why it's occurred, see where you were in the store at the time. If you'd been a bit more active, if you'd been on the floor, maybe this wouldn't have happened.
And still, he's got a plan that he's going to hit Asprey no matter what.
So on the 22nd of June, 1990, the King made his appointment with Destiny.
Oh, I just love the sweetened diamonds.
At £50,000, of course you do. I dare say they would look splendid on you. Would you mind awfully amusing yourself for a while?
How may I help you, sir?
I'm looking for something very special for her that hits just the right note. But of course, discretion is extremely important.
Of course.
Welcome to Asprey, gentlemen. How may we help you today?
We're just browsing, thank you. We can help ourselves.
Very good, sir.
Hey, buddy, can you give us a hand over here for a minute?
If you'll excuse me, sir.
I was wondering if you could help my wife spend my money.
Indeed, sir.
It's our anniversary.
Nice work from Tex, eh?
He's still the best in the business.
All 18 carats.
And now to work, my king.
Most of the girls so long, well.
When I buy a wedge of this,
Looks lovely.
I do not be paid to
18 carat.
Get a new one, honey. That one's ugly.
I could possibly go to £30,000, but I'd rather not if I can help it. You know what I mean?
Of course, sir.
Phew! It's getting warm in here. You know what, honey? I think we might buy you a nice fur coat instead. Thanks for your help, fella.
Very good, sir.
Thanks.
Shall we get it, my dear?
No, I don't think so. I want the pink diamonds we saw yesterday.
I'm so sorry. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't even think I would even bother to pay for a pair. I'm very disappointed, but thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming to Asprey, gentlemen. I trust you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. We already have. Philippe? They say the world has changed since we were young, but I'd say the more things change, the more they stay the same.
It's thought jewellery worth up to £2 million has been stolen from Asprey's, the exclusive West End store. Police say a gang of thieves stole the valuables from the New Bond Street store on June the 22nd, but details have only just emerged. It's believed 4 men and a woman posed as customers, and one of them opened a display case while sales assistants were distracted.
Here's Asprey's. This is impregnable. They didn't even know about it till 2 or 3 hours later. Now, they're not only in the West End, they're not only in Bond Street, they're from their front door to West End Central. There's exactly 186 yards. Who would have the audacity to sneak underneath the police radar, underneath all of the snotty-nosed security who would catch anybody doing anything? They caught nobody. And that's where the king he really was the jewel in the top of the crown by getting Asprey.
The time of the Kangaroo Gang had passed. So there he was, taking on the most fabulous jeweller in London, appointed to the Queen. The Kangaroo Gang rides again for one more time. So it really was an ego job, not about the money.
Asprey has officially confirmed for the first time what happened. Staff member Steve Eves was in the store when the king struck.
A very skilled team had come in and diverted the attention of the staff.
Oh, and I'd like to see the new range also. That one is so outdated. He really needs a new one.
Okay. Humour my wife, if you will.
There were, if I can remember correctly, about 5 different jewellery desks, and 2 lots of, shall I call them the villains, kept the staff busy by asking to see various items.
I'm prepared to go to £30,000, but I'd rather not if I can help it. You know what I mean.
Of course, sir.
Leaving 2 men to help themselves to the merchandise.
How they done that in 1990 still unknowns to myself. It's a complete mystery, because life had moved on. The generations had changed. All the latest technology had came in, all the security devices that had came in.
We still don't know how they got into the showcases because there was no obvious damage.
They managed to get the key. They'd made an impression of the key in a piece of damp soap, went off and had a copy of the key made by a dodgy locksmith, and went back with that key.
the king had slipped in to a time when it was over. How and where he found those people to work with, I think he might have gone to Hollywood and got a team of actors and told them they were in a movie script or something.
You know what, honey? I think we might buy you a nice fur coat instead. Thanks for your help, fella.
Very good, sir. On that day, I can remember I was in the manager's office when the head of the jewellery department came down and said, Stephen, you must come up to the jewellery department. He was in a very shocked condition. And there were 3 empty showcases and 3 of our best suites had vanished.
That would have comprised necklaces, earrings, some rings and so forth, 3 entire suites. And this was rumoured to be worth about £1.8 million.
I mean, everybody knew. I mean, he didn't keep it a secret, Arthur. I don't think he ever stopped talking about it.
And so, after Asprey, the legend of Arthur Delaney, the King of Thieves, was secure. He had turned back the clock to the 1960s, those fabulous, almost mythical days when the Aussies tore up London by day and by night.
Well, fibs on, mate. Here's to another day in Oyster's Paradise.
You betcha. If only those blokes back in Sydney could see us now.
He would never recapture that moment again. 2 years later, in 1992, he was in Bangkok by a hotel pool.
He's got the company of a lovely young Thai girl with him, and certain acts were being performed, and I think a man of his age, there's probably a bit too much excitement because unfortunately he suffered a major coronary during this act and just expired. Was brown bread, as they say, toast, as others might say.
There was no money left to get him home. Arthur's share of the Asprey loot was long gone.
His friends have to whip around to actually get his body brought back from Thailand. Comes in a plain box, arrives at Sydney Airport. Some of the police are tipped off that the king is returning. They come to the airport and they get the box open to make sure that he's in fact dead, because he's disappeared for 12 years, mind you. They haven't heard of him for 12 years, even though he's been coming in and out of Australia at will. So they go, yep, sure enough, that's the king. Welcome home, Arthur.
Meanwhile, the fibber had turned his hand to drugs, making a fortune importing marijuana into Australia from Southeast Asia.
He was convicted in, I think it was 94, of a 15-tonne importation. And if you want to talk about the judiciary treating you lightly, I think for importing 15 tonnes he got a 4-year jail sentence and only served 2 years, pleading that he's an old man, frail and needed to be out of jail. So even in the judiciary he was able to present this lovable character picture, and in jail he presented as a wonderful prisoner and was released after 2 years.
When he came out of prison, the fibber could still be found spinning his double headers at the 2-Up ring every Anzac Day. He made one last trip to England before he died of cancer in 2002.
He came back here to tell us that he wouldn't be about next year. You know, he knew it was on him, so he came back to have a drink with us all. So a pal of mine does all the supplies there, so I got him put in a penthouse.
Georgie Gardner was chased back to Australia in the early 70s and invested in a small pest control company. He died from throat cancer in 2010.
He was involved in, I believe, in some jobs here and there, but he was very low-key. I mean, he couldn't move around Australia because he was still wanted in Victoria on warrants from the 50s. He was suspected of a couple of murders that were still open, so he had to keep a pretty low profile.
Wee Jimmy Lloyd returned to Australia and his old trade of pickpocketing in racecourses, working right up to his death in 2006.
He'd saved his money. He'd kept his first shilling prisoner till the end. You know, he had all the money that he'd stolen over in England, and he set about educating his children. And his children today, as I understand it, are involved in the professions. They're very respectable. No one's gone into crime.
The General Billy Hill was in and out of jail for the rest of his life. Many thought he was flat broke when he died in the 1980s, but Scotland Yard picked up a transfer of more than £200,000 to a colleague in Australia. Meanwhile, baby Bruce turned his intellect to earning an honest living in business and has stayed out of trouble ever since.
Bruce was smart, very sweet. He was smarter than most of them, I tell you that. He knew what he was doing, Bruce. And he went into good businesses, straight businesses. You know? That's where he did his best deals.
I would tell nobody in their younger days to try the same things what we tried. It's not good, and it's ruthless, and you wind up in jail. And it's not a nice place.
At 85, Dave Barry is still the governor of Queensway, wheeling and dealing just like he did back in the old days of the Kangaroo Gang.
I wouldn't nominate any of them as the best. Oh, for fuck's sake. I see. How many do you want? Anyway, I'm at what do you call it? I'm at the dentist. I'm having my teeth taken out, so you'll have to ring me back.
The Kangaroo Gang are passing into history, but the great memories remain.
Bloody good friends, real good friends. You know, we form relationships, and for those that are still alive, are lasting still, which is nice, isn't it? Nothing wrong with that.